Okay, Daniela, you have the floor. Thank you.
Good morning. Sorry. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, excellencies and ladies and gentlemen from around the world. There are hundreds of people who are registered for today's event and many more who are watching us globally. I'm so happy to welcome you today to this very important commemoration of the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. And this morning event here in New York has been organized by the Division for Inclusive Social Development of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And allow me to thank also for the excellent work, the whole team, in particular, Ms. Alexia Shaku and Mr. Amin Lamrabat, and the Program for Disability section, as well as the Program Planning and Coordination Unit that are in the division I have the honor to lead. I'm also very proud to thank our colleagues from the Human Resources Office for the excellent collaboration. We have been working very closely together in order to devote the whole day on the importance of finding solutions for an accessible and equitable world for all, specifically for persons with disabilities. So follow up the celebration of this day in the afternoon as well. We know that most often in moments of crisis, like the interconnected ones, like those humanity is facing in the present times today, either because of shocks of the COVID-19 pandemic, or because of wars or climate change. Well, all of this, when it comes to persons in vulnerable situations, such as persons with disabilities most of the times, has a negative impact, often leaving them behind. We have a roadmap that is the 2030 Agenda and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, as we call them, that is helping us, though, to find the way out. To leave no one behind, it is crucial for the public and the private sector to collaboratively find solutions with the persons with disabilities to make the world a more accessible and equitable place. And this is why today we are focusing on 3 P's: public, private, and people with disabilities, in order to create a network of friends and stakeholders who will work together, share good practices, and act together, like the Sustainable Development Goal 17 invites us to do, by creating partnerships and international cooperation to build a more sustainable and resilient world for all and for the generations to come. The topic of today is transformative solutions for inclusive development and the role of innovation in fueling an accessible and equitable world. We have thought to focus on 2 Sustainable Development Goals, that is SDG 8, employment, and SDG 10, inequalities, and see how, through employment, we can reduce the gap of inequalities, and see how, through employment, we can also provide tools, innovative tools, for people to live a better life, in this case, persons with disabilities. The event of today and the focus on these 2 SDGs will also feed into the Commission for Social Development next February 2023, that has identified as policy theme exactly this: how employment, SDG 8, can help to reduce inequalities, SDG 10, and we thought to take as an exemplar case the sector of sport for development. We have an amazing parterre of speakers and incredible moderators from the public and the private sector, as well as persons with disabilities who are going to share their empowering stories, many of which have a physical or sensory disability. And in my case, I am a wheelchair user due to paraplegia since I was 6 years old. The event will kick off with an introductory plenary session with opening remarks from the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Gutierrez, followed by a message by the Ambassador of Qatar to the United Nations, who is also the chair of the Commission for Social Development this year. And then we will hear also an opening remarks from the Ambassador of Tunisia to the United Nations, as well as, of course, the voice of youth, telling us her story in a few minutes, which is really empowering, of this young woman who has a disability herself. She lost her hand, and she is using a technological assistive device beautifully designed. 3 panels will follow, and before closing, there will be approximately half an hour of questions and answers. And we will have then the final remarks from the representative of the Permanent Mission of Korea. I will be supported throughout this event also by Mr. Lamrabat, who will introduce the various panels and moderators, while I will follow with you and support you to moderate the discussions that will take place after the 3 panels. Please note that there will be few minutes of break between the panels, but to come back. Having said this, I give the floor now to kick the start of the day to His Excellency, the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Gutierrez.
Daniela, so you have the message to read. Thank you.
Well, it's greetings from the Secretary General, who believes very much in supporting this very important day and this so-called minority group, which is the largest minority group in the world. And he would like to underline the fact that also the United Nations is taking action, having launched a couple of years ago the United Nations Disability Inclusive Strategy, because also our Undersecretary General believes that the United Nations has to be an exemplar employer, and by doing that, to lead by example the other members of this organization, that is the members of the United Nations, 194 countries, to lead by example for them to follow the same steps to reduce inequalities, to promote inclusion. And our aim is also to support, says the Secretary General, the endeavors of member states in creating a world that is really equal, promotes equity, and it is inclusive, leaving no one and no country behind. This is, in a nutshell, the welcoming remark of the Secretary General. Thank you very much for this, Secretary General, for your encouragement. We would like now to ask Ambassador Ladeb, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Tunisia to the United Nations, who is also the President-elect of the Bureau of the 16th Conference of the State Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, to share his remarks. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Good morning, everybody. At the outset, I wish a happy International Day of People with Disabilities to all of us. And I would like to thank the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the Division for Inclusive Social Development for organizing this timely event, which coincides with the celebration of the International Day of Solidarity with People with Disabilities. I commend the choice of the theme and the intended outcome of this commemoration, which not only highlights the importance of inclusive development of people with disabilities, but gives it a major new dimension of innovation. This event and its outcome, I believe, will elevate the awareness about the importance of innovation, give further impetus, and diffuse more energy and impulsion to our engagement and action for a more effective disability inclusive approach capable of addressing structural inequalities and enhancing the participation and role of people with disabilities. As we prepare for next upcoming events, mainly the Conference of the State Parties on the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, which I am honored to chair, the forthcoming session of Commission for Social Development in ECOSOC, the SDG Summit, and the Summit of the Future. Underemployment and unemployment of people with disabilities exacerbates economic and social exclusion, and the factors underlying the disproportionate risk of extreme poverty and lack of access to health, education, and other social services among people with disabilities, especially in low and middle income countries. It also impacts the ability of those countries to build back better and progress in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. However, innovation for disability inclusive development can trigger innovative and transformative solutions and broaden the scope of action for member states to address inequities and create new opportunities for people with disabilities, improve their inclusion, and reduce their vulnerabilities. This approach should be adopted and supported by member states and all stakeholders as a catalyst for their efforts in view of building inclusive and sustainable societies, fulfilling the SDGs agenda to leave no one behind, and to eradicate poverty, stigma, and marginalization among communities with disabilities. In this connection, and to yield the expected results, further efforts are required to make sure that disability rights are enforced through inclusive and harmonized national legal frameworks, and more resources are allocated with a special focus on gender and youth dimensions by strengthening the participation of women, youth, and girls with disabilities in governance and political and social life, and by enhancing their involvement in all initiatives aiming at improving their conditions and inclusive development. In addition to the difficulties pertaining to marginalization and discrimination, people with disabilities are disproportionately affected by the challenges the world is facing today, such as conflicts, food security, economic and financial crisis, pandemics, and climate change. According to several reports, they have experienced acute and adverse socioeconomic impacts during the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. From this perspective, innovative solutions and approaches of inclusive development must take these multipliers of vulnerabilities into consideration, and therefore people with disabilities would no longer remain a left behind group. As chair of the 16th Conference of the States Parties of the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, I will, in cooperation and collaboration with the Secretariat, members of the Bureau, and member states, work on getting innovation for disability inclusive development an overriding global priority and an impetus for local, regional, and international efforts. I would say a few words about Tunisia experience. Tunisia is fully engaged in protecting the rights of persons with disabilities, overcoming discrimination and stereotypes, and promoting their well-being and inclusive development through enacting many laws, policies, and programs in harmony with the CRPD and all other relevant international commitments. The government continues its efforts to further improve access to physical spaces, information technology, and communication, and to enhance awareness raising. In close cooperation with civil society, Tunisia has set up many projects aiming at creating better employment, decent work opportunities for people with disability, particularly women and young people. It accords special attention to children with disabilities in the context of early detection and diagnosis of disability, as well as early intervention and support for them to achieve full potentials. In the same context, Tunisia accords special attention to ensure access to suitable education, rehabilitation, and vocational training for children with disabilities. The government is also engaged in providing physical and psychological resources, budgetary allocations, organizing cultural and sports activities, and using information and communications technology, in addition to adequate resources and legal framework to protect them from all forms of abuse. To conclude, I would like to reiterate our commitment to continue our active engagement and contribution to all efforts and initiatives aiming at building partnerships and advancing policies for the well-being and inclusion of persons with disabilities. I thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, and to be gender balanced, now we will hear the opening remarks from a recorded video. Unfortunately, she couldn't be present live, but with her spirit indeed. And I'm talking about Her Excellency, the Ambassador, Miss Alia Ahmed Saif Al Thani, who is Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the State of Qatar to the United Nations, Chair of the Commission for Social Development for this year, and she is also co-chair of the Group of Friends on Sport for Development. So, Your Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, dear colleagues. On the occasion of the International Day of Persons with Disabilities, the State of Qatar is delighted to co-host this important event. As you all know, the 2022 FIFA World Cup is currently taking place in Qatar. It is being watched by millions of fans all over the world and enjoyed by thousands more in Qatar, including people with disabilities. In this regard, I would like to highlight the groundbreaking transformative solutions and innovation for disability that the State of Qatar has put in place to make this World Cup the most accessible tournament ever held. One of the game-changing initiatives put in place was the development of the Accessibility Forum Initiative, which includes people with disabilities, including those with physical, mental, and cognitive disabilities, as well as more than 30 organizations that represent them in the organization of all aspects of the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Various aspects of the World Cup, such as transportation, tourism, infrastructure, and the tournament facilities were discussed with people with disabilities, and we were very proud of the critical feedback received on how accessibility can be a reality in all of the 8 World Cup stadiums. Some of the most important changes are audio descriptive commentary and the addition of sensory rooms in the stadiums for people with neurological differences to be part of the whole experience. To conclude, let me say that Qatar made use of every technology and innovation available to ensure inclusivity during the World Cup. Qatar will continue to strive to promote development that is inclusive of persons with disabilities for a more just world. I wish you a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Your Excellency. For sure, we're going to work very closely together. And now we have to give the voice to the youth. And we would like to hear the experience and the message from a youth with a disability. And I'm referring here to Ms. Annika Emeret, whom we already had the pleasure to have as guest in the past. Please, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. I'm Annika Emmer. I'm 17 years old from St. Augustine, Florida, the United States. I have had the greatest pleasure to speak on International Day of Persons with Disabilities previously, and I am very grateful to have been asked to speak once again. I'm eager to share what I've experienced and learned this past year about inequalities of persons with disabilities, and I want to thank everyone for being here to speak on such an important matter. I love seeing the interest from others like me who have disabilities, as well as the able-bodied persons who are speaking here today and helping us reach a goal. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development has so many aspects added into it, such as the people, the planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership are all critical areas of importance that we are working together to reach. My background that I have been able to share and advocate for is youth with disabilities in sport. I have played soccer, or most commonly known as football, my whole life. Sport has assisted me in learning how to face adversity and overcome it. Just like every athlete, you are faced with choices, issues, tough instruction, and differences that they will need to see their way through. Being a person with a physical disability, it's easy for me to end up being a target on the field and being seen as weak and unequal. When somebody like me has a love for their sport and will put all of their heart into playing, that passion and drive will show on the field. Showing others that we are capable of more than they can see on the outside is an important factor, because this is how the youth today will pave the way for generations to come. Those before us were not as willing to put themselves out on the front lines of adversity as we are now. Our efforts today will bring change and opportunities for people with all kinds of disabilities. These past 2 years, I have been exposed to many opportunities that have expanded my mind and ideas on inclusivity. For example, innovation, creating new ways of livelihood and to support ourselves and our community of persons with determination. Being a part of the medical academy at my high school has brought to my attention obstacles as simple as protective equipment, namely gloves. A group of peers and I competed in a competition called Project Innovation and presented and advocated for the need for a special design made to fit hands of people with upper limb disabilities, allowing them to pursue careers in fields where protective gear is required. Opening advantages and equality in employment, our efforts today, I pray and I know, will bring change and opportunities for people with all kinds of disabilities. Thank you.
We thank you, Annika, for sharing your experience and for being such an activist in spite of your young age. I will be supported throughout the various panels, as I said, by Mr. Lamrabat. However, allow me to introduce the first interactive dialogue. And it's about innovation for disability inclusive development in employment. And it is going to be moderated by an incredible person I met not long ago, but really impressed me. And there he is smiling, Stéphane Leblois from the Valuable 500. So the floor is, actually the panel is yours. Please moderate this incredible panel composed by the private, the public, and persons with disabilities, focusing on employment as a way to reduce inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. What an introduction, and the feeling is mutual. And thank you to you, to the UN, and to my esteemed fellow panelists today for this wonderful conversation. My name is Stéphane Leblois. I'm the Director of Partnerships at the Valuable 500. For an audio description, I'm a white male with graying brown hair, glasses, sporting a mustache, a gray cardigan, and a blue shirt in a room with a open window over my right shoulder. And so, just a brief kind of dialogue on who the Valuable 500 is and why this is such an important part of what we do. We are a network of that's comprised of 500 private sector companies, some of the biggest brands in the world. And within our network, we have 22 million employees, across 64 sectors and 41 countries. And the topic of employment is one that binds all of our companies, whether you're based and operating in the global South or North. This is a topic that affects the entire private sector, and it's something that is certainly on everybody's mind this year and moving into next. But without further ado, I'd love to enjoy my fellow, I'd love to present my fellow panelists today. We have Mr. Christopher P. Liu, who's the ambassador and representative of the U.S. to United Nations and the co-chair of the Steering Committee on Accessibility. We have Mohan Pieris, who's the ambassador and permanent representative of Sri Lanka to the United Nations. We have Mr. Victor Kalisi, who's the Director of Global Culture, Equity, and Inclusion at Walmart, delivering some remarks a little bit later. Mr. Andy Imperato, Executive Director of Disability Rights California. We have Irene Mbari Kirka, who's the CEO and founder of Enable Africa. And lastly, we have Ms. Hafsa Kadir, CEO and founder of I'm Inclusive, who will be sharing her personal story a little bit later on in this panel discussion. So I guess we'll cut right to it and start with our first question today, which is a great one. So innovation can refer to something new or a new way of doing something, or an innovation, or the practice of developing and introducing change, including in the arts, medicine, policies, overcoming prejudices, and changing mindsets and behavior. So to my fellow panelists, please share one or two concrete examples to illustrate how and why specific innovations or technologies prove to be successful or promising in promoting accessibility and the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the labor market. And so we will start with Ambassador Liu.
Dear Stefan, I think Ambassador Liu has been experiencing technical difficulties and he will not be able to attend the panel at this stage. I'm not sure if he will be able to join later, but I think, yes, I think we should go ask one of the other panelists.
Okay, no problem, and I hope everything is okay. Let's move on to Ambassador Pieris, please. Okay.
I think we are also trying to promote him as a panelist. So please just go ahead with the other panelists. Sorry about that.
All right.
Technical difficulties.
Andy, my friend, over to you.
Thank you, Stefan. Can you hear me okay?
Can you hear me now?
It sounds like maybe the ambassador is on.
Now you are. Yeah, where do I my script?
Stefan, do you want to go back to the ambassador, or do you want to?
Sure. Let's kick it over to the ambassador, and then Andy, you'll follow.
Okay. Am I on? I'm Ambassador Pieris. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Ambassador.
Oh, thank you for giving me the floor. As the outcome of this event will create a network of friends between the public sector and the private sector, and people with disabilities known as the 3 Ps, and will contribute to the theme of this session, would no doubt go a long way in assisting policy. I would say to making and ensuring that resources are allocated effectively and efficiently. Now, having said that, in Sri Lanka, persons with disabilities consist almost 8.7% of the population. The government of Sri Lanka has taken a number of measures to address all human rights and fundamental freedoms to all persons with disabilities, as envisioned in the Convention on the Rights of the Persons with Disabilities. Now, one such measure is the Protection of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act number 28 of 1996, which decrees that no person with a disability shall be discriminated against on the grounds of such disability in recruitment for any employment or office or admission to any educational institution. The 1988 Public Administration Circular number 27 decrees that 3% of the vacancies in the public service and public companies should be filled by persons with disabilities and should not be treated as a hindrance to the performance of duties. The Ministry of Labor and Trade Union Relations has decided to prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability in employment, especially in recruitment processes. And to give legal effect to this decision, new provisions have been incorporated under the fundamental principles of the proposed new Employment Act, which is at present at the discussion stage. Now, the new Employment Act, interestingly, states that it shall be an offense against this act for an employer, manpower supply agency, or an employment agency to discriminate against any person in any of the terms and conditions of hiring, in employment, remuneration, promotion, or termination of employment on the basis of gender, race, origin, ethnicity, language, creed, caste, age, family, or marital status, or disability, most important. So the 2006 Disabled Persons Accessibility, Mr. Moderator, Regulation 1 applies to all public service buildings, public places, and to places where common services are available, to which buildings, places, and services persons with disabilities have access. It gives the specifics in the construction of new buildings which require public access to be made accessible to persons with disabilities. So you will see, my dear friends, excellencies, and distinguished delegates, that the government of Sri Lanka has and is taking very substantial measures to create awareness among the people with regard to promoting and protecting the rights of people with disabilities through publications and dedicated programs. So Sri Lanka also gave special attention to neutralizing stigmatization of the persons with psychiatric disorders. So while we have a long path to tread, we appreciate to fully realize these goals, we are confident that the steps being taken today are in the right direction that would place the guiding principles in a trajectory that would help to achieve its objectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Pieris, and let's make sure we have quite a lot of content to cover today, and appreciate very much that intervention. Let's I'll ask the speakers to be to take 1 or 2 minutes per response to each question. We have Andy up next. Andy.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Andy Imperato with Disability Rights California. You know, in response to your question about specific innovation, sometimes we don't think about people with mental disabilities when we think about innovation. There tends to be a focus on technology innovation for people with sensory or physical disabilities. I'm a person with bipolar disorder, so I thought I would give you an example of an innovation that helps people with mental disabilities. One thing that we've done at Disability Rights California since I've been here, I've been the executive director for almost 3 years, is when we interview candidates for jobs, we give them the questions in advance. This is a form of accessibility for people who are autistic and people who have other types of disabilities. It ends up being a fairer assessment of their ability to answer the questions if they have them in advance. So we just go ahead and give them to all candidates. That's an example of an innovation that didn't cost us anything, but we think it's helping people be more successful when they interview for jobs. Back to you, Stefan.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Andy. Great points there. Irene, over to you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. I think when we think about digital accessibility in employment, we have to take a few steps back and think about education to make sure that people with disabilities are receiving good quality education and they have access to information. So what Kenya did in this case is there was an absence of information on where should companies begin from, where should education institutions start from. So what Kenya did is we decided to develop a digital accessibility standard. And for us, this is an innovative way to create an enabling environment for accessibility to thrive, whether it's in education, in employment, in access to products and services. We know that the government provides a lot of services and most of them are not accessible to people with disabilities. We know private sector develops a lot of products that are not inclusive, but even at the UN and other institutions. So for us, what we did is we invested in creating a document, a standard that most companies, most businesses, whether when you're employing someone, you can think about the type of technology they're going to use, the type of digital content that you're producing as a company, to really think twice and see what do we need to do to make sure that it's inclusive to people with disabilities. So that's something that Kenya has done. And currently we're in the process of, we're collaborating with the Kenyan government and various stakeholders, people with disabilities who are at the heart of developing this document. And what we are doing currently is creating awareness and supporting organizations that are implementing the standard. Thank you. Over to you, Stefan.
Thank you, Irene. And lastly, we'll go to Hafsa. Hafsa, do you have anything to add?
Definitely. I would like to add that when it comes to innovation, we've seen a lot of advancements in the UAE, where I'm living currently, come across. So just our own enterprise, I Am Inclusive, was founded through a social innovation program where the government of the UAE brought together applicants from all across the world to create solutions for the inclusion of people with disabilities. And that shows not only a government level effort, but also encouraging individuals to innovate, whatever innovation looks like for different regions and countries. So for solutions to come out for equitable employment, the government taking the stand to create such environments where they foster innovation, and for people, communities as well, to create solutions that can deliver such holistic solutions for inclusive employment. Both work hand in hand when it comes to inclusive employment, because it has many, many different layers to it.
Thank you so much for that, Hafsa. And so this next question deals less with specific products or assistive technologies and delves more into the types of skills and certainly soft skills required to create supportive and enabling environments. So what skills and tools are needed to create inclusive environments to empower persons with disabilities in their capacities, both as employees or employers? What has worked based on your experience? And so we'll go back to Ambassador Pierres. Oh, looks like you're on mute, Ambassador.
Can you hear me now? Thank you. Stephen, thank you. Speaking for myself, having been associated with the legal system in Sri Lanka for long years, and perhaps in legal education, I can tell you the application of ICT as an aid to the assistance of disabled students, lawyers, even judges, to be able to dispense, to participate in the legal system by using innovative methods is something that we have adopted. We have legal officers in our systems who are disabled. Some of them don't have their sight, for example. But notwithstanding, they continue to play a very vital role. We have students in our faculties of law, and that's because of the innovative methods we have used in the imparting of knowledge and the environment that we have created for them to participate. Even at a very at the level of infrastructure, the courts are now being designed to accommodate people with disabilities. Boards, digital boards, which can probably give them the information they want, ramps to access the court, lots of little things in that way, in keeping with the new legislation. So I just want to make the point, Stephen, that the first emotion when one is confronted with a disability is one of fear, and fear for their unknown future, fear for their well-being, fear for their ability to create lasting friendships and chart a meaningful life, and a fear of our ability to protect them from the world that can be difficult to even those of us who are without challenges, the challenge of a disability. So we need to overcome that feeling of fear by the realization that fear creates inertia. That fear, I say, must be transformed into something positive. It needs to be exploited to offset that disability, and Sri Lanka perhaps is moving in substantial measure to try and make the environment as friendly as possible to those of them with disabilities. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Ambassador. Andy, same question over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. You know, to the extent that you're asking what are skills that we need to have inclusive work environments that are going to work well for folks with disabilities, I would say it's the same skills that we need to have inclusive work environments that will work well for every worker. There's not a unique skill set to have an inclusive work environment for folks with disabilities. For me, as a lawyer with bipolar disorder, I do better in environments that are not top down. I do better in environments where everybody's treated with dignity and respect. I do well in environments where people's differences are viewed as positive, people's lived experience, including lived experience at the intersection of disability and other identities, is viewed as positive, and people are encouraged to bring their whole selves to work. So again, back to your question, what's the skills that people need? I would say it's the skills that any leader needs to be effective in the modern workplace. It's not disability specific skills. It's the skills, understanding human difference, understanding the value of human diversity, and understanding the value of treating your employees with dignity and respect. Thank you.
Andy, thank you so much for that. I love the emphasis on kind of the universality of addressing the workplace as not just a workplace to be inclusive for folks with disabilities, but inclusive for all. Let's see, same question over to you, Irene.
Thank you. I do tend to agree with Andy, but I want to go ahead and put an emphasis on digital skills. When we think about assistive technology skills, it is super, super critical for people with disabilities to have the right type of skills. And this is to make sure that they can access information. They know what to do, how to access content, how to access their benefits, how to do their work independently. So a good example, Enable has spent the last 14 years training blind children in Kenya how to use technology. And on a daily basis, we have about 1,000 blind students on our program. But what's amazing is you start from a point where they think this is a foreign device and they don't know what to do, to a point where they're sending emails, they're doing research projects on their own, they're on social media, they're creating content. That level of independence is super, super critical. But we realize that it's proper, depending with the disability, to get the right type of training so that you're completely independent and you're able to participate in the global economy. Thank you.
I love that answer. Thank you, Irene, for that emphasis. Hafsa.
Thank you. I do agree with all of my co-panelists, actually, and everybody has such unique perspectives to this as well. I'd like to add that inclusion is also a life skill. So in our trainings of employers in Middle East, North Africa, we've noticed that some employers are at different readiness stages than the others. Some employers might just be starting with the idea of understanding what disability inclusion is. And for them, we openly share that while inclusion could have been a skill that somebody is learning at their educational place, at their institute, if they haven't learned that yet, the workplace is a really good area to teach people what inclusion really is, how to celebrate diversity, what is the ROI on celebrating diversity and inclusion. So there are different perspectives of how we train employers on this. And the other part I want to bring in light as well is the capacity building of the HR departments that are responsible for building culturally diverse teams and inclusive teams and teams that include people of determination. So the HR managers also require specific exposure and capacity building to understand how fast the world is evolving and what are the different criteria that people are looking for when they're applying to jobs these days. So I do believe that inclusion is a life skill that can be taught, that can be strengthened over time. And I hope more recruiters will do that.
Gosh, Hafsa, I love that answer. And I know I'm not a panelist, but I got to add this point. So in addition to anything that you might do to create an enabling workplace and to recruit more disabled talent, how are you then cultivating that talent? What are different avenues that you're creating? What are different spaces that you're creating to boost disabled leaders who are looking to take on more leadership roles and climb kind of the corporate ladders? What are you doing to make sure that other professional development opportunities are made accessible and inclusive? So those are also things to think about, whether you're in the public or private sector. So last question, and this one is kind of to wrap things up here, and then we'll go to Q&A. Based on the topic discussed in this panel, what do you believe is the way forward to engage this network of public and private sector practitioners, to engage this network and sustain partnership among the 3 Ps, the public sector, including the United Nations, the private sector, and persons with disabilities? We'll go to Ambassador Pierres.
Stephen, I think there are certain valuable soft job skills for adults with disabilities that prospective employers will look for, undoubtedly, notwithstanding their disabilities. One perhaps is they would look to the ability that a person has, whether a person has an attention to detail. Now that's important. Then, of course, goes without saying, what is the level of the communication skills? And those communication skills, whatever the level may be, must be developed. Is there an ability to manage conflict, notwithstanding the disability? Is there an ability to, shall I say, solve problems? That ability might, again, be something that the persons with disabilities might develop. Can he work as a team? Can he play a participatory role in the office environment? Does he have the ability, for example, to manage his time or appreciate the time frame that's available to him in a day's work? Now, I think those are some of the soft skills that adults with disabilities might endeavor to develop if prospective employers are to be interested in them. So those are some of the few things that I thought I should probably bring to this discourse, because they are important from the point of view of the employer. And I can assure you that in the public service back at home, the accommodation of persons with disabilities is very pretty good, and there is a lot of accommodation and camaraderie when it comes to working with persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And just a note, as we round out kind of our panel discussion here, we will have a video message from Victor Khaleesi to play at the end. So right before we get into Q&A, we will play that video and then round this session out with Hafsa's story. So Andy, over to you for this answer.
Sure, Stefan, you're asking kind of how do we bring together these 3 sectors around the issue, the private sector, public sector, and individuals. And I would say the common denominator are disabled people leading, whether you're in the private sector, you're in the public sector, or we're talking about individuals. If proud, out disabled people are not leading the effort, it's not going to be as successful. And those of us who have non-visible disabilities, we have the opportunity to be out and proud with our lived experience and to use that in our work as leaders. I don't think I would be as effective as a leader of Disability Rights California, which is a $44 million legal services organization, if I wasn't out and proud with my bipolar disorder. And now I have lots and lots of people who work for me who are talking about their disabilities at work who weren't talking about them before. So if you want to innovate, if you want to lead, start with people with lived experience and try hard to make sure that you have people with lived experience who reflect the diversity of the disability community, which obviously is incredibly diverse in every sense. So that to me is the common denominator. If disabled people are leading in every sector, then we will innovate and we will have progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, for centering our conversation around the most important stakeholder group we're talking about, right, which is the disability community. Okay, let's go to Irene.
Yes, so again, I agree with Andy, but one thing I want to say is that for sure, people with disabilities need to have a seat at the table. But what we want to see is people with disabilities in leadership positions in departments that have nothing to do with disability. That way, we integrate into every department, every layer of every government, private sector office. And this way, people will begin to understand, colleagues will begin to understand, what does it take to work with someone who's blind? What does it take to work with someone with a reading disability? Where do I need to support them? Or what do I learn for myself? Because the problem we have is that there's a gap, there's a disconnection. And decisions are mainly made, especially in the disability community. But when we try to penetrate other areas, it's very difficult. So if there's a way we can make sure that people with disabilities have leadership positions in areas that have nothing to do with disability, then this will go a long way. Then, of course, the commitment from top leadership in every organization so that people with leadership, with disabilities can be able to thrive within the various departments. Thank you.
I love that point. I love that point, Irene, making sure that disability is not just siloed into disability work, but permeates across any organization we're talking about, whether it's government, private, or public. Thank you so much for that. Hafsa, we'll go to you, and then we'll go to Victor's recorded message.
Definitely. Thank you so much to everybody again for adding such valuable inputs. And I do want to focus on one part here of all of the leaders who are people of determination or people with disabilities that need to be a part of the conversation. I would say we need to focus on the young people as well. So knowing that the young people are the legacy and the decision makers of tomorrow, the youth leading this conversation and understanding this conversation is extremely important right now, not just for the disability inclusion space, but for the impact sector as a whole, for the young people to understand how they can create solutions that bring the 3 Ps together. And if we don't create awareness about the UN SDGs and show the roadmaps to the young people today, tomorrow we might not have such aware decision makers. So through our work and through what we're seeing now with accelerators, leadership centers, incubators of solutions, we focus a lot on the young people having a very clear understanding of what is UN SDG 8, what is UN SDG 10, what are the different objectives under that impact inclusive employment, because we want these people to drive these decisions tomorrow, like the audience and the participants and the panelists today have been doing for so many years.
Hafsa, thank you for that. And we harken back to Annika's initial intervention earlier, the important role that youth with disabilities have in this conversation. We go now to Victor's recorded message. Please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Victor Calisi, and it's so great to celebrate International Day of Persons with Disabilities with you. As some of you may know, I have moved on from my work in the city of New York, and I am now director at Walmart in their newly formed Accessibility Center of Excellence. And our goal is to be the most accessible omni-channel retailer for our customers, our members, and associates with disabilities. Building on my work in the city, where we employed over 500 persons with disabilities, I am now working on our associate life cycle, how we hire people, how we find them, how we grow them, how we further them. And I want to focus on a collaborative approach as an innovation to success. I have heard so many times from employers that disability talent is hard to find. And it's not like there is one person or one organization that can do this and help us find persons with disabilities. This really has to be a multi-pronged approach. Because there are many people working to advance the careers of people with disabilities. There are government organizations, nonprofit organizations. There are funders who want to see persons with disabilities hired, colleges with disabled students, high schools transitioning youth into the workplace, neurodiverse programs, and foundations for the blind, the deaf, and the hard of hearing. And we have to take an approach to reach all of them, because it will be impossible to find the talent if we don't. Recently, At Walmart, we started to recruit for seasonal remote working jobs, where we teamed up with a national government council and a nonprofit organization for people with physical disabilities. And we worked together on job descriptions, on a recruitment strategy, and I'm happy to say that we hired about 45% of the people that applied. Starting small has been my approach. This way, we build ambassadors that can talk great about the program. We have partners across the enterprise that see the value in hiring a person with a disability. And most of all, this builds proof of concept. We employ over 1 million people in America and over 2 million around the world. And we are planning to work with others across our business to employ people with disabilities. Because we have jobs in many areas, and I look forward to what we will accomplish. As we find and identify our jobs, build business partners across the enterprise, it's important to have those who are recruiting understand people with disabilities, because they are the first to interact with this potential associate, and this is what really sets the tone. It's important to have basic training on disability etiquette and know how to provide accommodations when needed. Because people with disabilities need tools to succeed in the workplace. They can be accessible assistive technology, flexible schedules, sign language interpretation or screen readers, and these tools take shape as an accommodation. And we should be looking beyond this process, where we can allow people with disabilities to pick and choose the tools that they need, when they need it, and how they need it. This is easier said than done, and I look forward to coming back and letting you know what we have accomplished in the future. So hopefully I set the stage for the rest of the amazing panel that is coming up next. And I want to say thank you.
And thank you to Victor for that wonderful, wonderful intervention and speaking a little bit about what Walmart's doing to move the needle. We now have a couple of questions in the chat. Although it sounds like Ambassador Liu has joined, and Ambassador, if you wanted to go ahead and say a few words, we'd love to hear from you.
Great, thank you so much for having me. And I apologize for the delay in being here. I'm proud to be here in my role as the co-chair of the UN Accessibility Steering Committee, which the US co-chairs with Ambassador Webson from Antigua and Barbuda. But today I'm really speaking as the former US Deputy Secretary of Labor, where one of my highest priorities was increasing employment opportunities for people with disabilities. And we have to do this. And if you look at the statistics, they're stark. The unemployment rate for people with disabilities in the United States is 8.2%, compared to 3.3% unemployment for people without disabilities. But that doesn't even begin to tell you the full story. When you look at the percentage of people with disabilities in the labor force, that's only 38%. That means that barely 1/3 of the people with disabilities are working or actively seeking work. And that needs to change. And it's one of the reasons why the US federal government has a hiring goal of 12% for people with disabilities. It's one of the reasons why the US government prioritizes using contractors that employ people with disabilities. And it's one of the reasons why in the federal government, there are central accommodation funds to allow for the purchase of assistive technology. But what I learned during my 20 years of service in the federal government is that policies aren't enough. You need cultural change. You need leaders who expand the places where they're recruiting, who are willing to consider people with disabilities at all levels of jobs, especially senior positions, and people who understand that diversity isn't just a code word, but it's essential for a well-functioning organization. Now, look, we in the United States are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and we need to do more. But here's the thing. From my 11 months here at the UN, I've seen that despite all of the rhetoric at the UN, and it's incredibly inspiring and powerful, much more needs to be done to help those people that work here in the UN. And so over the past few months, I've had the pleasure of meeting with UN groups that represent employees with disabilities. And they consistently tell me that much more needs to be done to improve physical accessibility to the building. Much more needs to be done to track disability hiring and increase opportunities. Much more needs to be done to provide assistive technologies to employees, and much more needs to be done to support employees with family members with disabilities. And so we've made great progress, the Accessibility Steering Committee, but as the co-chair, we're committed to continuing to increase awareness of the challenges faced by the employees who work and do such the important work at the UN. So thank you for having me, and we look forward to engaging with all of you in the days and months ahead.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Liu, for your important intervention and certainly for speaking on how you are moving the needle internally at the UN. It sounds like there's a lot of important work happening there. And so, we're running low on time. I want to kick it over to my friend Hafsa, as she has a wonderful presentation and an impactful story to share. Hafsa, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Stefan, and thank you for giving me this opportunity, to the UN team and Ms. Daniela Bass as well. For audio description purposes, I am a person who has short hair. I identify myself as a woman, and I am currently wearing a purple dress shirt, and purple is also the color for disability inclusion in many global and regional communities. I am Hafsa Kadir. I am the CEO and founder of I'm Inclusive, which is a platform connecting people of determination, the term we use for people with disabilities as per the UAE government. And we are also training the employers to build the capacity to recruit more people with disabilities at scale. I'm going to share with you my story and the journey of how I'm Inclusive has come to be today. So I'm going to share my screen. So this story begins with my brother and I. My brother is a person of determination. He lives with spinal bifida and he is empowered by a wheelchair. On the screen, there are 3 photos. One is of my brother Ahmed, who is sitting next to a shopping cart, which is holding a piano. The next is of Ahmed, who is suited in a business attire. And the third photo is of both of us smiling directly at the camera. These series of pictures were taken at a time when me and Ahmed both together applied to the UAE's first social innovation program to find solutions for the holistic inclusion of people of determination. Our goal was to make inclusive employment a norm. Why? Because I grew up with a person of determination. So I understood very well what isolation can do to families entirely if you're excluded from the conversation on disability inclusion. And essentially, we wanted to create an app that would connect the employers to people of determination with ease. At the day of this pitch, we carried this piano exactly how you see it to the venue. And for the first half of the pitch, Ahmed played the piano. Now, we were presenting in front of a very senior panel of government judges, so they probably expected something differently. But that entire purpose of showing them the talent, instead of just speaking business statistics, was to tell them that talent is limitless. But not all families, not all communities, not all teachers have the awareness of this yet, which is why it leads us to lose access to such great talent when it comes to recruiters. Our journey was successful, and we were able to make it to the top 10 enterprises that would get to test out their idea with the government of Abu Dhabi in 2019, out of 523 applications across the world. I was only 24 and Ahmed was just 16, so kudos to his courage, and many times his courage is what kept me going. This is a photo of Saira Sayed on the screen. She is wearing a hijab and she is smiling. Soon after we started working on creating this initiative as a community initiative in the start with the Abu Dhabi government, I met Saira Sayed. Saira is also a person of determination. And when I met her initially, she was not employed. And I asked her, why is that? And she shared with me, it's because she is a person who lives with muscular dystrophy, and she had asked her employer to provide her with an accessible toilet, which she was refused. When she was going into the journey of her education, she could not access the exam room after 4 years of her studies because there was a staircase, so she couldn't give her exams. And to this day, while this shocks me, I am so lucky that I met Saira early in my journey because she became a very permanent part of her team. In 2022, I'm proud to share that Saira graduated from the University of Cambridge's Executive Program on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Business Impact, of which certificate there is a photo also on the screen. Saira also represented I'm Inclusive and the UAE at the World Expo in 2022. You see, our journey began with us finding solutions with the community, with us employing people of determination on our teams, with me going back to Ahmed and Saira and many people with disabilities along our journey who we met, asking them what is the right way to go. Because I understood that this is a solution that I am creating with people, not for people. I can't talk at people, I have to talk to people. And while we were growing in numbers and we were creating huge pools of clientele and employers by 2022, we were facing a significant challenge. There was no recognition of a social business in the UAE as of 2022. In the November of 2022, quite recently, we've made history in the nation. For the first time, the Abu Dhabi government, the same innovation center that launched our mission, has launched the social enterprise licenses, making us the first inclusive employment platform in the UAE to receive this certification by the Abu Dhabi government, allowing us to now do business with more and more employers and actually having a license that supports us. In the November of 2022, we also hosted our first on-site career fair, which included 12 recruiters interviewing one-to-one over 200 people of determination over a span of just 2 days. So what do Ahmed and I do today? Well, anything we do, we don't do it alone. We're definitely becoming a huge movement for equitable employment, and we have full-time team members working with us, so our team has scaled a lot. We're driven by young people for sure, and 50% of our team are people of determination as well. We've created a lot of awareness for different topics, such as the deaf culture in MENA, such as sign language classes, going into accessibility, and hoping to explore more and more of digital inclusion. So the message that I leave you with today is this. In my journey, what I learned was that it's so important to follow your heart because our hearts are inclusive. We learn exclusion over time. I remember this photo on the screen from a trip that I took with Ahmed and I to the beach, where I came back and I saw that he was drawing an H and an A in the sand. And this is something that became so integral in my journey that I understood that if I had not followed my heart, I would have perhaps lost all these different movements and the moments of inclusion that were created through me going after what I really, really found to be my calling. So on behalf of Ahmed, myself, my entire team, I thank you again for this opportunity, for listening to our story, and I hope that we will cross paths in collaboration towards inclusion. Thank you.
Wow, what an amazing way to wrap up such an impactful discussion here. We've been answering some questions in the chat, and unfortunately we'll be out of time, so we won't be doing Q&A this time, but I want to thank my fellow panelists. I want to thank Daniela, Amin, and Alexia, who made this whole production possible. Yeah, on behalf of the panel, thank you and have a great rest of your day or evening, and we'll be taking a short break.
Daniela, I think if everyone is ready, we can start. Thank you.
Welcome back after this short break to the celebration of the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. We started with an amazing panel, incredible contributions, and now it's time to focus on the second SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, that is the one related to reducing inequalities, innovation for disability inclusive development in reducing inequalities. The moderator of this panel is Ms. Michal Rimon, who is the CEO of Access Israel. Michal, please.
Thank you very, very much, Daniela. And up till now, amazing event. Thank you very much for including me and this amazing panel in this. So as Daniela introduced me, I'm Michal Rimon. I'm the CEO of Access Israel, and I'm so glad to be here with great old friends and partners to our mutual goal of true inclusion for people with disabilities all over the world, and new friends who together I hope will join us and continue this incredible journey. I will start with a description of myself. I am a woman, a white woman with blondish, brownish hair, sitting in an office, white background, and a messy shelf unit on the side, but let's not focus on that. I'm honored to lead this panel on innovation for disability inclusive development in reducing inequality, SDG 10. Now, reducing inequalities and ensuring no one is left behind are integral to achieving the SDGs. In our panel today, we will hear about various innovations, practical tools, and good practices that can bring about or affect the reduction of inequalities in the workplace through promoting diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in both public and private sectors in a way that can truly affect people with disabilities and provide them with an opportunity to advance, improve their chances to success, making sure they are not left behind. The issue of disabilities, accessibility, inclusion has no borders and affects all countries and cultures around the world. And I'm therefore very happy to include in today's panel representatives from all over the world. And to open the panel today, I'm very happy to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Walton Alfonso Webson, Ambassador and Representative of Antigua and Barbuda to the United Nations, co-chairing of the Steering Committee on Accessibility, who will share his input on this important issue. Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I am sitting in my office and I do have messy piles of Braille paper all around. So let's focus on the message. Madam Chair, I am indeed grateful to the co-host to this event. I am very thankful to join with the organizers and DESA and for the invitation extended to me by Mrs. Lebas and the opportunity to address this very important topic in the transformative ways that we can provide and address the questions of inclusive development and the role of innovation in guiding an accessible and equitable world. I want to begin with couple of points, some from the last panel, which I had the opportunity to listen into a little bit of it. I think for sure, technology has transformed the possibilities for persons with disability, and it is now up to us to take advantage of that in trying to achieve what the objective of leaving no one behind. I also clearly believe what Andy and Irene said in their closing statements, the issue of culture, of persons with disability leading programs, not necessarily programs that deals with disability or organizations that deals with disability, but organizations it's broader public service, whether it's in the public-private sector. but that we need to see that in order to bring about cultural change, because the issue is not so much the technical, not so much the skill, it's the culture within society and within the communities. So let me look therefore at a couple of opportunities and challenges that, and the progress that we have made in this area. Employment and decent work, referring to SDG 8, of course, a most effective means to reducing inequalities, promoting economic empowerment, and breaking the very vicious cycle of poverty and marginalization that so many persons with disabilities live in and experience, the lived experience of persons with disability that is brought on by these ills of poverty and marginalization. Yet, we still have a long way to go to make inclusive employment a reality for all. The points mentioned in your first panel would have addressed some of those. As I said, I believe very strongly in the cultural shift within organizations and society, but organizations being the microcosm that will begin that break in the broader society. Persons with disabilities account for 15% of the global population, still face stigma, discrimination, and societal barriers leading to exclusion from education, employment, and other opportunities. The potential of persons with disabilities often remains untapped due to the discrimination and the misconceptions in the workplace, which has exacerbated by accessibility and reason and lack of reasonable accommodation. My friends, globally, the employment to the population ratio of persons with disability is almost half that of persons without disability. The statistics would show that there are significantly less persons with disability who are either working or even looking work. Much of this is based on the discrimination and the exclusion that many of us, persons with disability, face. Employed persons with disability tend to earn less in their wages than those without disability. Women with disabilities face even greater discrimination and suffer from gender gap, the gender gap bias. Compared with men with disability, women with disability are still likely to be unemployed or inactive in the labor markets, and less likely to work in leadership and decision-making roles. Persons with disabilities, a very interesting story I always find when I speak to persons with disability, while their earning is less, their expenses tend to be more. Yes, because even technology to assist in their accessibility in many places, you have to purchase that yourself. Not like in some developed countries where it might be. I think I heard Ambassador Liu speaking of the United States federal government providing resources to places to assist that. In many places that you don't have that. So you have to pay for that. And it's much more expensive than a person without disability having to provide themselves with any kind of equipment to either work or study. Person with disability pay more simply to get around. And I know the person who is visually impaired, simply being to be assisted in like airports and other places, you are called upon to pay tips that are not necessarily a charge to other people. And these things and your clothes, your daily livelihood is more expensive, yet your earning power your wages are less. Persons with intellectual and psychological disabilities, and persons with autism are least likely to be employed. Therefore, more robust legislation and more targeted policy intervention are required within countries and within organizations. Organizations must look at employing persons with disabilities with the capacity at the very highest level, because that's how we begin to change the culture within the organization. And that's how we begin to be sure that we are addressing equity within organizations amongst people. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we learned some very interesting and startling lessons. We saw how this exacerbated the challenges that persons with disability face. While on the one hand, you would have thought that the new transformation in work from home would be helpful in employment of persons with disability, we saw in many cases that that was a challenge. We saw in many places that we had to create social environment for persons with disability using these platforms that we're using now in order to be able to get through to persons so that we can begin to make sure that persons are not left behind. However, we can learn from the experiences of the COVID and build on the opportunities created in the recovery of the pandemic. For example, the increase to promote work in nearly all countries could improve the availability of the positions that are now created, and persons with disability can find these positions a little more acceptable. If you can work from home, if you have the training with the technology, and you can use the technology to assist in the work. In my own country, we have seen some really interesting little opportunities created. And I'm from a very small island, Antigua and Barbuda, and the employment of persons with disability we are quite proud how persons with disability have found their ways within some of the workplaces. We in the government legal services, within some family-owned businesses, within the new blue industry, blue economy, as we look at the aqua industry and how that is developing. We are seeing room for persons with disabilities. Disability needs to be mainstream in policies and measures for sustainable development. Data from developing countries suggests that 1/3 of persons with disabilities consider their workplace as hindering or not accessible at all. In fact, we can say in many developing countries, simply getting around in cities, in the towns, in order to get to it is a hindrance towards the employment. Therefore, development cooperation at the global level, at the regional level, and at the country level must play a key role in promoting disability inclusion in the labor markets, awareness raising, increased accessibility, including the physical environment, transportation, information, and the communication are all key aspects for inclusive employment. To reduce inequalities, it is also important to note the role of education and for the workers and to use education as a vehicle towards employment.
Ambassador,
let me conclude by saying that we have broken the back of many of the efforts in terms of people's interests. We now have to move forward and make those interests into reality and create real opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for those inspiring words. And I definitely would like to learn more of what is done in your country. And now we will move to San Marino. And I'm happy to introduce Ambassador Damiano Bellefi. I hope that's the right pronunciation. Ambassador and Permanent Representative of San Marino to the United Nations, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank the Director of UN DESA, Ms. Daniela Bass, for inviting me here today. I know that my time is short, so I will get directly to the point. What about innovation and disability? And what about innovation and disability in San Marino? When we discuss innovation, we immediately think of its technological dimension, which is, of course, extremely important. In fact, today we have tools that not only make the daily life of persons with disabilities more accessible, better, but at the same time, they are also contributing to enlarge the spectrum of therapies. In San Marino, persons with disabilities benefit from technological advancements. But innovation is not limited to this aspect, to this dimension. It is also a way in which we can see things differently. It could be a new vision and consequently a new approach to disability. In connection with this, the CRPD represents for us the most important innovation so far. The CRPD says that disability has no longer to be conceived as a disease, but it must be experienced as in the awareness that diversity is a part of human condition. And from this new perspective in San Marino, we have left behind a medical approach to disability in favor of a social perspective based on human rights and fundamental freedoms, as set up in the CRPD. And for several years, San Marino is taking this new approach not only by enlarging the availability of new services, but also by taking decisions and adopting laws that concern directly persons with disabilities. So I don't know, I would stop here for the moment. If I have the opportunity to go back later, I would be more precise and detailed on this kind of new perspective and how has been carried on in San Marino so far.
Ambassador, thank you very much. And I really hope we'll have more time because I would love to hear more from you. Okay, we'll dive right in because we are running a little bit late. And I would like to first introduce our great panelists. Our first one will be Sarah Basson, first of all, a friend, and she is the Emerging Markets Accessibility and Disability Inclusion Lead in Google. Next, we have Matt McCann, the CEO of Access Earth. Again, great to see you again. And lastly, one of the new friends, because I don't think we had the opportunity to meet before, Dr. Mary Davis. She's an undergraduate capstone faculty member at the Jackson School for Global Affairs, and she will give a different angle, focusing on fashion and its connections to music, sports, society. And let's see how, Mary, you're going to bring that together to our discussion today. Interesting combination. Can't wait to hear what all of you guys have to say. And to everybody who's watching, many times we sit in our conferences and hear about what the experts are saying. This is all about us. It's learning, joining hands, and I'm sure that you will also have input to give, whether in the questions and answer later or contact us afterwards. So this is definitely a combination of all of us together. Let's begin with the first question. So in the context of a rapidly digitalized world of work, we know the HR recruiting process, for example, is using AI tools which are considered advanced and progressive in screening candidates, but are they taking into account people with disabilities? What are some of the practical tools, dear panelists, and good practices that in your experience are effective in reducing inequalities at the workplace? And also if you can add what the challenges are that you encountered. Sarah, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you, Michal. I love that you introduce people and talk about them as being old friends or new friends. And for those who are not yet Michal's friends, just let me tell you quick, you will become Michal's friends, and then you will become permanent friends. So it's something for all of us to look forward to. What are some recommended, good practices? I think, of course, as this morning or time of day moves on, we're going to see that we are, amplifying each other's messages, which I suppose is a good thing. It suggests that we definitely all recognize what needs to be done, and there isn't a lot of disagreement here. We kind of know what needs to be done. Start with, and I come from Google, so a lot of this is going to be colored by that perspective. Start with ensuring that your companies are hiring people with disabilities, and that when you hire people with disabilities, they are part of all the company practices, not just HR and not just diversity, but they're in technology, they're in marketing, and so on. If you have a company that creates software, as Google does, you need to make sure that your software developers are well trained in the art and the science of what it takes to create accessible and, I might emphasize, usable software. Companies that license software, and that is all of us, even those companies like our own that create a lot of software. You need to make sure that you have robust procurement processes that prioritize accessibility in the procurement process, along with everything else that matters to your company, like security and privacy. Companies need to make sure that the software that they create, that the software that they are licensing has been evaluated and tested by people with disabilities, centering on the actual community of people with disabilities for their critical feedback. And not just at the final stages, at all stages all the way through. If there are bugs, if there are gaps, make sure that they get prioritized. Michal, you mentioned, one of the obstacles, always the prioritization is always an obstacle. There are so many important things that all of our companies need to do. And so, it's important for those of us that are committed to the space to make sure that it is centered. I'll speak quickly about some technical opportunities. We hear a lot about artificial intelligence and machine learning. This also creates huge opportunities for a more equitable workplace for people with disabilities. I'll pick on one example. Speech recognition has dramatically improved over the last few years using machine learning, and it's particularly critical in settings, say, where you don't have human captioners, that you can now have really robust, high quality speech recognition and transcriptioning available to better enable deaf and hard of hearing employees in the workforce to have a more equitable experience. And so this includes settings like hallway conversations. It includes what happens when you're in a cafeteria eating lunch and you don't have a captioner. So it's, again, enabled great opportunities, and it extends beyond just live captioning. Also, the fact that there are now easy mechanisms to automatically get captions for videos, for podcasts, and phone calls. So I guess I'll close with that in terms of this first question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm always amazed to see you Googlers with true dedication and commitment. And I see it throughout. And I'm urging everyone, if you don't know what Google is doing in this field, look it up, contact, reach out. Great work and great outcomes. Next, Matt, I'm turning to you. What are some of the practical tools and great practices in your experience?
Thank you very much, Michal, and thank you very much, everyone, for having me here. I think you can talk about technology and innovation the whole time, but as well, for the purposes of visual description, I am a white, visibly disabled male with shoulder-length brown hair, wearing a white jacket, and there's a virtual background of the River Liffey in Ireland behind me. But I think going back to the main innovation, and for me, that's always got to be communication. Making sure that if you're hiring people with disabilities, and you should be, and there are people with disabilities working within your organization, make sure that you're communicating with them in an effective, clear way, an inclusive way. I think one of the big pieces of technology that you see these days is in the normalization of remote and hybrid working options. There's benefits to those with persons with disabilities. It's actually one of the most requested forms of accommodation when hiring someone, and it's taken a pandemic to make that normalized. And I think that that's something that we should continue to hold on to and continue to improve. Something like captioning that you see in the video conferencing here, or text-to-speech software. Again, going back to echo some of Sarah's points, make sure that all of your software is inclusive and accessible where possible, that you're including people with disabilities in the conversations in the workplace, not just siloing them into roles where you feel disability-related roles. I think that that is some of the big challenges that you can see too, is in the use of all this technology, there seems to be almost a disconnect between how we communicate that technology and the use of that technology to everyone within the workplace. There's talk as well of the digital divide, which doesn't just exist with those anyone who's older. The digital divide will continue to exist for so long as we don't educate and inform people on how to best use the technology that's available. Innovation is only as good as the way it's communicated. And I think for me, that's got to be our biggest innovation.
Great. Thank you very much. And without further ado, Mary, please, I would love to hear your input and your connection to the subject, please.
Thank you, Mikhail, my new friend. I am delighted to be part of this discussion today. And for purposes of description, I am a white woman with short blonde hair wearing a sleeveless blue dress. And I have behind me a kind of glaring map of Paris. So Matt and I are in different cities this morning. The issue of fashion and clothing may seem like it is way out an outlier to the discussions that have been going on today, but I'd like to suggest that it really connects back to what Ambassador Liu was pointing out as the need for cultural change. Fashion may seem frivolous, but in fact, it is fundamental to equality in the workplace. It is, on the one hand, a mode of self-expression that should not be denied to anyone. Clothing can provide a sense of dignity and self-esteem in the workplace. And I think another thing that's often overlooked is that it can open doors to networks and empowerment that lead into the leadership positions that have been discussed by earlier panels. Many of the tools are simple ones. They are design-related tools, for example, not using zippers, but using magnets, really simple technological fixes. Some of the other technologies that are important in improving the conditions are 3D printing and the inclusion of wearable devices in the workplace that can, for example, conductive wires in fabrics that can allow for touchless or deviceless intersection with technology. So one of the challenges in all of this is the way in which bringing design and technology together through clothing and fashion requires a sort of interdisciplinary effort, and it requires people from different sectors to come together, including designers in the fashion world and members of the disability community who, as I believe Sarah was saying earlier, need to be integrated into a process from the very beginning through to the end point. I'll leave it there for now.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Very interesting. We'll move to the next question. Again, our focus here now is on really the inclusion. I mean, the technology is amazing and it's a tool to reach the final goal, which is inclusion in order to avoid and diminish inequalities. Our next question, we are talking about innovations and advances in technology, which constitute a promising pathway to inclusive and sustainable development. But much of this is taking place in advanced economies. It is important to ensure an equal share in the benefits technological advances have to offer across the globe. Given this, my question to you is, what are the main structural challenges to innovation as a transformative solution for the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the labor market. Sarah, I think this is totally in your court.
This is totally in my court. And I neglected earlier to do the physical description. And so I'll do that quickly. I am a white woman of a certain age with shoulder length, light brown hair. I'm wearing a multicolored jacket, and I am working from my home office, but with a blurred background, you really don't see much, which is probably to everyone's advantage. So yes, the emerging market and global south is, an area that is very near and dear to my heart. We've done some studies on this at Google, just, studies of literature in the space. And it's clear that in these areas, people with disabilities, particularly women with disabilities, are more impacted with low employment, low literacy, and poor healthcare than the general population. There are social stigmas and so on. So much to be done there. And so really an area of passion for me. From a technology perspective, again, I'll bring that from the, wearing my Google hat. There are assistive technology solutions available globally, but they have not really been customized to the needs of the global south. And so going back again to the example of speech recognition that I mentioned in the previous question, huge opportunities for deaf and hard of hearing users to understand information in school, in the workplace. So a great enabler, but in order to be useful in these emerging market underserved communities, it needs to be available in local languages. Now, Google has announced an initiative, which is very exciting, to develop language models for 1,000 languages over the next few years. And so that's going to be a great boon, but it's still work in progress. And it might take years until speech recognition is available for more rural communities without large populations of speakers, and yet even more critical in these spaces. So that's, again, an area that those of us interested and involved in emerging markets are trying to drive actively. Another blocker for emerging market communities in the global south, the lack of reliable internet access. So many of the assistive technologies, Google has a plethora of assistive technologies available freely on Android devices, which is great. It's a huge boon for communities without a lot of financial resources. So that's great. But many of these assistive technologies either assume that you have access to a high-end mobile device, or which is likely too expensive for these communities, and or assume that you have pervasive access to Wi-Fi. So those are two things that we need to keep in mind. And so moving forward, hopefully, NGOs, philanthropic organizations, and companies and governments will see these assistive technologies as necessities in order to advance education and to enable people to get into the workforce, and will craft their solutions accordingly, not expecting that you're using the highest end mobile devices. And we also need to support local startups and accelerators, because they know the needs on the ground, and they're going to craft solutions that are better suited for their communities and countries.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And I can share that when we were in Kenya just half a year ago, it was amazing to see the power of, once you have that smartphone and have all the opportunities, even in a place that is emerging, the possibilities are really incredible. Matt, on to you, please.
Thank you very much, Michal. And again, I just want to echo a lot of Sarah's points. I think a lot of those challenges do exist, in particular in the infrastructural side of things. And in a lot of ways, we need to view technology as a resource. And that resource, in a sense, also has to be distributed equitably and fairly. And again, to Sarah's point, that a lot of the infrastructural challenges will take time to equalize out across different countries. But I think one of the big points that we want to be able to make here is it's about progress over perfection. I think if we were waiting for everyone to have access to the latest 5G or 4G technologies, then we would be waiting a long time and we wouldn't get that progress. So I think we need to be able to make sure that we can, again, communicate clearly and effectively to people the information that is available, and what can be done to help to improve that in a easy to follow roadmap, so that we don't have to rely on those large scale devices. And yeah, just again, progress over perfection.
Thank you very much, Matt. And Mary, with your permission, I'm going to jump to the third question and let you start off on that. Based on the topic we discussed in today's panel, what do you believe is the way forward to engage this network and sustain partnership among what we call the 3 Ps, the public sector, including the UN, the private sector, and persons with disabilities? Mary.
Yes, thank you. Again, I'm going to come at this from a slightly less technological point of view, but to come back maybe to a fundamental point about access to appropriate clothing or empowering clothing. And I want to point out that there are very few global brands who are engaged in this marketplace right now. Tommy Hilfiger is one, American Eagle is a second. Nike has gone in the area of footwear with some success. But this is an opportunity, a challenge, but also an opportunity for companies to make a contribution to inclusivity in the workplace. It's also a massive commercial opportunity. The marketplace is estimated to be a $400 billion marketplace. And so I believe that we will see some action and some movement toward larger global brands being involved in this activity, rather than it remaining in the purview generally of smaller entrepreneurial operations. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Sarah, what are you saying? You're on mute. The most commented comment in the last 3 years.
The most rookie era. Yes. Sorry. So, a number of us that focus on accessibility and disability inclusion in the private sector have long acknowledged that we might compete on all sorts of other things, but accessibility and disability inclusion is not one. And so we are extremely collaborative. And so the idea of actually private sector working with others in private sector to solve some of these problems that are, too large for any one of us to solve alone, and just not areas where we compete or choose to compete. So that's even in the private sector. In terms of the, obviously the United Nations with its powerful, such a powerful voice, to advocate for these sorts of changes worldwide. So, so the idea of connecting with the United Nations obviously is critical. And then in like the not-for-profit sector, the NGOs, one of the great things about that is that gives us a tap into the community of people with disabilities. So, as we keep on mentioning, we build with people with disabilities. And so the more we have those connections, the more critical it is. One of the mantras of our Disability Alliance Employee Resource Group at Google is nothing about us without us, and nothing without us at all. So these connections with the NGOs are clearly give us critical insights and opportunities to do this sort of user experience research and make sure that when we're going out there, we are, really reflecting the voice and the needs of the community in an authentic way.
Yeah, I think basically to sum it up, you're saying teamwork is of essence here, and not just to hear, but to listen and act, taking everyone into consideration. Great. Matt, third question, last question, now to you.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is between the 3 Ps, we want to ensure that no one is left behind with regard to access to technology, with regard to ability. And the important thing is about not just bringing people with disabilities to the table, but to ensure that their voices are elevated and amplified when the policies and goals that are being created at the public level are then reflected and trickle down to the private level. I think the key thing with the 3 Ps here is we need all 3 to act in unison and all 3 to be working towards those same goals. Like it's been mentioned before, it's with inclusion, there's no such thing as competition. With inclusion, it's for everyone. And I think that we need to ensure that disability is not left behind in that conversation.
Great, thank you very much. Now, when we started, Ambassador Belefi, we rushed you into responding, and you have been sitting and listening and hearing, and I'd love to get some input from you, like concluding what you started saying before, please.
Thank you for giving me again the floor, Michael. And as I said before, for several years, San Marino is taking a new approach based on human rights and fundamental freedoms as set up in the CRPD. And not only by enlarging the availability of new services, but also by taking decisions and adopting laws that concern directly persons with disabilities. What we are doing in concrete, we are involving San Marinese NGOs and persons with disabilities in institutional working groups. Now we have a working group that is focusing on a new law which should assure a better working inclusion. And the government's consultant for this specific law is a person with disabilities and also an expert in this topic. We also have a second working group in which the Committee on Disability and the National Association of the Deaf are giving their contribution for the implementation of new tools aiming at removing communicative barriers. And following this new approach, one of the most recent measures taken in San Marino is the establishment of a disability help desk in December 2021. The main task of the desk is to inform, support, and protect persons with disabilities with the aim to reach a better independence and social inclusion. In this context, we are also offering classes and projects for kids with intellectual disabilities. So let me just conclude by saying that the progress we achieved in San Marino in the last few years is important, but of course, more has to be done in order to fully implement the CRPD and the SDGs 8 and 10 for persons with disabilities. But we are confident because we see that this new interaction among public, private, and civil society, in particular with association, NGOs that are in particular focused on the topic of persons with disabilities, is really promising in San Marino. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Now, before we go to our last speaker, I just want to wrap up what was said here. Again, we are focusing on SDG 10, on inequalities. And we know and we heard that 1 out of 3 people with disabilities experience discrimination. And while we see a lot of improvements in the labor force, we still see that there is a decline in labor share of income, which means an increase in the pressure on inequality. Now, we have to remember all the amazing things that were raised today, technologies, the fashion aspects, assistive technology, policies. Eventually, all of these, as I said before, are a means to an end. If we open the door, if we make sure that people with disability understand, first of all, that they are players in the game, they are there, employment is for them. And I can tell you that throughout the post-COVID era, people that never thought they can be part of the workforce, all of a sudden can be part of the game. If we have that sensitivity, if we use those technologies, if we have that change in concept, and the problem is if we won't do that, the gaps will just widen, and this is what we're all here to avoid. Again, thank you very much to our panelists today, and we always like to end with hearing it from the people themselves. And I have an amazing young speaker who is going to end this with her story, Miss Isidora Guzman Silva. Please share your story, and then I'll be back.
Hi, nice to meet you. Well, I'm Isidora Guzman Silva. I'm from Chile. I'm an inclusion activist and also an SDGs youth leader worldwide. Since this year, I'm the founder of an organization that works for democratizing inclusion and helps people with disabilities to find inclusive and accessible places in different areas of life, schools, jobs, entertainment, and from my experience, I could say that when I started in this journey, I have 12 years old. And this was why I experienced scholarly exclusion and social bullying. I was out of the scholar system for 6 months. And then when I started on my third school, I realized that I want to do a change. And there's when Find Your Place, or in Spanish, Encuentra tu lugar, was born with the purpose of no one being left behind, and started making a systematic change in my community and society, and even worldwide if we want. Now the organization have more than 2 years working for people with disabilities, autonomy, and independence, and with more than 30 volunteers around my country. When I started this journey, I never imagined that disability could be something so important, because here in my country, we are still living the paradigm that disability is an illness and it has to be improved. We haven't transitioned into this new paradigm of people with disabilities with rights, and disability is part of the environment, no, it's fault of the person. But I think that from my point of view, I have been made a change, because as a young woman, I have been using social media for create awareness since the pandemic, and I developed a Instagram community about 1,002 followers and we talk about inclusion, disability, the reality in Chile, and how to improve our society. But this is a really hidden topic. Disability is not something part of our society. Sometimes it's pretty weird when, at least in my country, I'm talking from my own reality, when people said, oh, there's people with disabilities, there's still people talking about invalid people, or I don't know, a lot of topics that are pretty old here, but we have to change it. And I think that the power, it's in people. People, it's the key for change these things. Of course, we have to create partnership between private and public sector, but people, it's the one who is going to hold the changes and push how the things have to be done, because we are being empowered and being heard for own stories, or own stories. And our own stories are the unique ones who are going to develop a change. As I am now recognized worldwide, but I never imagined that from one bad experience that even take me into a very dark side of my life, then make me be empowered and a change maker in my society. So I could say that there's a lot of things to improve, but the key is to empower people with disabilities and start to creating strategies that involve public, private, and civil society, because that's a unique way to start creating changes interconnected and knowing their realities. Because without the realities of the people who is living this, we are never going to start a real change. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really hope that I can see you again in another opportunity.
Absolutely, face to face. Thank you so much. I have to conclude now just saying thank you again, Daniela, for this great opportunity. And Amin and Alexia, great job. And passing the mic on to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michal. Thank you to the speakers of this second panel. It was indeed so energetic and dynamic. I think that we have heard about some topics that indeed deserve to focus more time and discuss about those. And maybe we could have specific workshops using the space of the United Nations and have an in-depth discussion on some of these topics that we just touched the surface. Apologies if I haven't described myself at the very beginning. As I said, I'm the director of the Division for Inclusive Social Development at the UN DESA. I have short brown hair I am Caucasian, white, and I'm wearing a white jacket. And in front of me, there is the flag of the United Nations, while in the background is blurred. We have now the third and last panel, and then hopefully there will be time for questions and answers. It's about innovation for disability inclusive development, and we have taken sport as an exemplar case. The moderator is Mr. Adam Fraser, CEO from Laureus of Sport for Good. Adam, now it's up to you to introduce the panelists and lead a very exciting discussion like the first two. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. If someone could just give me a sign they can hear me okay.
Yes, we can.
Great. I will start with the introduction. I'm a white male in a black shirt. I still by habit say I have brown hair, although increasingly there's very little of it. And I am in front of a branded virtual backdrop, which is to spare you all the sight of the kitchen in our London office, which you can see through the wall behind me otherwise. And very, very proud to be part of today, very grateful to Daniela and her team for all the work they do in this area, and especially for being champions of the role of sport in achieving inclusion, in achieving the SDGs as a whole. Laureus Sport for Good is a very quick introduction. It was founded under the patronage of Nelson Mandela, and we use sport to end violence, discrimination, and inequality. I think the moderator of the last panel said technology is amazing, but it's a tool, and that's our view of sport as well. Sport is amazing, but it's a tool. We're focused on the gender equity, peace building, education, employability, health and well-being, and inclusion outcomes linked to the SDGs that come from sport, and that clearly in a number of ways affects persons with disabilities. We have some amazing speakers today. I know we're running a little bit behind, so hopefully by keeping our answers brief, we can still get through everything. But I will start by introducing, for some opening remarks, Ambassador Markova Concepcion of Panama.
Good morning, distinguished guests and colleagues. Thank you, Director Daniela Bass, for convening this important meeting. And I appreciate this important opportunity to convey some ideas in this panel. The inclusion of people with disability in the labor market and in society in general means breaking down existing barriers to guarantee access to equal opportunities. Each one of us is responsible for making our contribution towards a more inclusive and sustainable world. And simple acts such as developing empathy for others, avoiding stereotypes, and eliminating prejudices can have significant impacts in different aspects of their life. The effective participation of people with disability in the labor market, especially in the sports labor market, requires reinforcing innovation processes and the use of new information and communication technologies in order to provide them with tools in their workplace, taking into consideration their diverse skills and abilities. Results on the larger scale in terms of sustainable development can be obtained by mainstreaming a human rights and gender approach when designing and implementing innovative policies and programs in all spheres. Women with disabilities facing even greater negative impacts as a result of discrimination, particularly in traditional male-dominated industries such as the sports sector. To generate greater and better results in the inclusion processes, we need different actions to be implemented. We need decision makers who dare to think out of the box in order to set a paradigm shift for disability, carrying out and coordinated and articulated work between all sectors. We must reinforce actions that generate greater awareness of the negative impact and loss generated by the exclusion of people with disability. according to the 2021 data of the World Bank, not taking into account the valuable contributions and added value generated by persons with disability may represent a loss of a country's GDP ranging from 3 to 7%. Sports spaces facilitate the development of soft skills and contribute to the empowerment and well-being of people with disabilities, and to improve the conditions of society as a whole. It also allows them to become role models, embodying positive values which must be promoted, such as inclusion, tolerance, respect, perseverance, and solidarity. Panama has started the implementation of the project Social Inclusion for Children and Young Persons with Autism through Sports, with the leadership of the Panama's First Lady, seeking to strengthen the government's capacity through joint work with multiple stakeholders to promote the full and effective inclusion of persons with disability in the society. This initiative can be conceived as a platform that prepares them for their future insertion in the labor market while contributing to generate awareness and changes in the mindset of people who are part of their environment. Panama has a strong commitment to continue working for a just and inclusive world for persons with disability. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me introduce our amazing panel today. We're very lucky to have speaking with us a great friend of my organization. We as Laureus fund organizations using sport to change lives around the world. Some of them are very small, some of them are very large. One of the largest is the incredible organization at Special Olympics, and I'm thrilled to have David Evangelista, the president and managing director of Special Olympics Europe Eurasia on this panel. Emmanuel Maceda de Medeiros, the CEO of the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, is also with us. Glenn Collane from Eurovision Sport, and I will come to each of them, but I will start because I know that she is on a very tight timeline and we are slightly behind schedule. I'll start with Preeti De Mello from Tata Consultancy Services, and we're going to talk on this panel about two things. And let's say one is internal to the world of sport. How can innovation help design programs and policies towards a future where the labor market is able to benefit from the abilities and skills of persons with disabilities in the sector? And we're also going to talk about let's say the effect of sport looking outwards. How can sport act as an enabler of inclusive development? Preeti, I'll come to you with the first question. How can the world of sport do better? What innovation is available to make better use of the skills and ability of persons with disabilities in this sector?
Adam, thank you. And thank you, Daniela, and a wonderful team at the UN for organizing this event. A quick descriptor: I am a middle-aged woman from the Indian subcontinent, and my hair is about onto my shoulders. I'm graying, and I'm wearing a hand-woven green sari, which is my traditional outfit. A little bit of context for all of us from the perspective, one of sport and the other of my organization. Now, I believe that the unique ability of sports to transcend linguistic, cultural, and social barriers makes it an excellent platform for strategies of inclusion and adaptation. I strongly believe that sports can transform the attitude about persons with disabilities by highlighting their skills and reducing the tendency to see disability instead of the person, which usually seems to be the biggest problem. Sports provides a platform for intentional inclusion where everyone, person with disability and without, interact with each other in a positive context. And we are forced to challenge bias, reshape assumptions about what we can do and cannot do. At TCS, at Tata Consultancy Services, our motto, inclusion without exception, is driven by its value for respect for the individual, and its conviction that business advantage is derived from diverse workforce. We are over 600,000 people across 45 countries in my organization. Our ethos was very beautifully set by our founder about 150 years ago. And he said, in a free enterprise, the community is not just another stakeholder, but in fact, the very purpose of its existence. Bringing this into the whole innovation dialogue, I would believe that innovation strategy should keep in mind accessibility for people, and designers should make sure to include people with a variety of disabilities in usability tests to ensure accessibility for everyone. People with disabilities represent a vast market, and organizations need to think of the future of their current products and services with disability lens in mind. We recognize that our focus should not be on the development of products and services, market potential, but specifically on accessibility. When we bring it together, it makes more sense, not only to us as an organization, but to our users. It is about the intersection of shared values that provides an infusion to build a new inclusive culture that will define the business ecosystem, and that's the world I currently come from. The first step, I believe, in supporting disabled talent in the arena of sports requires a deeper understanding of the space through education, awareness, and empathy. The policies and programs that we develop need to focus on digital transformation, and a lot has been spoken about that through the session, facilitating participation and partnership towards greater success and helping tap into the potential and unique skill of the community, creating a mutually supportive community enabled through assistive technology, mentoring and coaching to build resilience, coping mechanisms, and above all, sport-based inputs is essential for disabled sport persons to bring their whole self to the arena. To wrap it up, I want to remind us that Tata Consultancy Services is the title sponsor of the NYC Marathon and is placing inclusion front and center. Our app for the 2022 TCS NYC Marathon was a game changer and provided live streaming coverage for all our major race categories, specifically pro wheelchair men and women. And the marathon also had a live broadcast focusing on non-binary athletes, wheelchair athletes, amongst other inclusivity initiatives. I hand it back to you, Adam. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Priti, and thank you for the segue of the New York Marathon, because I believe that this year was also the first time that one of our amazing champions of Special Olympics, a Special Olympics athlete, completed the marathon. I may be wrong. I know it's the first time. I think he will complete all of the major marathons. But let me turn next then to David Evangelista from Special Olympics. And David, I'll ask you that same question. How can sport make better use of give better opportunities to people with disabilities, and also how can sport act as that catalyst and that enabler of inclusive development? What examples have you seen of that?
Thank you very much, Adam. I would be remiss if I didn't start by thanking Daniela for her leadership. To everyone at UN DESA, vi ringrazio, as always, for the UN's continued advocacy and solidarity with this community. I would also like to thank you, Adam, and the Laureus family for always believing in the power of sport to not only break down barriers, but rebuild dignity, rebuild opportunity, and rebuild the connectivity that brings all of us together, especially in situations and esteemed convenings like this. One of the things I'd like to speak to on this panel and at this moment is the way in which sport really is unto itself a classroom. And one of the key areas that sport can help drive is not only the full implementation of the education tenets in the UN CRPD, but also the larger tenets of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. All of us know that when we hit the pitch, hit the swimming pool, engage a coach, there is an incredible journey that takes place of learning, of teaching, of sharing, of trial and error. And we have seen this through the work of our unified sports and unified schools work in countries around the world. made possible by the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, a very generous foundation based in Athens, Greece. We have been able to expand the use of inclusive sports in schools around the world to not only provide students with intellectual disabilities more opportunities to compete and train and interscholastic competitions and trainings, but what I find to be even more compelling is the way in which it has empowered students without disabilities to learn from their peers with different abilities, to understand what empathy, tolerance, acceptance, and celebration of diversity means, especially at a time in history now where we're putting so much emphasis on DEI and the core tenets of coming together as a global family. I would also like to share that so many teachers have demonstrated how using inclusive sports, something that the Laureus family has been a huge proponent of and supporter of in Special Olympics for many years. Teachers have found that in the schools that implement Special Olympics inclusive programming, bullying rates drop drastically, student retention rates increase, grades improve, teacher retention is higher. And by and large, students have overwhelmingly reported in data that they find themselves more equipped to face a world of intolerance with the skills and the inclusive mindsets needed to make the world one that we all can celebrate for our children and our global community. What makes all of this possible? The simple yet profound use of inclusive play and inclusive sport. While it may seem rudimentary, Adam, and to many of us on this call, so many of the world's largest and most scalable innovations are quite simple, and they're right under our noses. One of the things I would like to ask for the global community is to consider the role that inclusive sports can play in the lives of everyone, whether you're athletic or not, and I am not overly athletic. To explain myself, I'm a 45-year-old male with brown hair, still a little bit of it, with a blue suit jacket and a white collar shirt. Very excited to be here. I'd encourage everyone to consider how schools, mainstream schools, the schools of individuals with disabilities, university settings, elementary school settings, how can we use the power of football, basketball, badminton, skiing, swimming, to bring youth together, to learn from each other, and to see each other as equals in a world so eager to turn the page on exclusion and replace it with solidarity and support. So Adam, on behalf of all of us at Special Olympics, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to offer these remarks to Daniela and you and DESA, and to the entire community, especially this esteemed panel for this very generous invitation. Over to you, and thank you.
Thank you, David. I will turn in a second to our other panelists, Glenn and Emmanuel. But Priti, I see on my screen your hand raised, and I know you need to leave us. So I will just turn to you if you had a final comment to make, or if that's a mistake that your hand has made. I'll move on with the rest of the panel.
Well, actually, it is a mistake. My apologies for that. But I'm happy to do a quick wrap up if you don't mind, and hand over. Well, thank you for bringing this topic in, and I'm thinking about my own story and looking at people around me. At TCS, what we find really interesting is one that we hire specifically from the sports field, and when we say sports field, with a focus on the disabled community. And as an example, we have country level champions who are in the field of tennis, table tennis, basketball, swimming, and chess, to just name a few. It's interesting that our technology innovations have been enhanced greatly in the past 1.5 years through the COVID timeframe, through our accessibility COE. Personally, when I look at it and turn around and see what has this done for the teams that I lead and the people that I work with, and what do I bring home, I also see that there is a greater and deeper understanding of ourselves that happens when we play a sport. And the responsibility for that does not rest entirely on those who play. It depends entirely on us and how we open those doors and engage with them and allow for these opportunities to be equitable and reasonable for each one. I have a 16-year-old son who plays soccer, and has great visions and desires for himself. I also do know that when he practices, especially when we go back home to India, in our backyard, there is this really sweet little boy who comes to play every now and then. So Kabir, my 16-year-old, was playing with him one day, and I was sitting in the veranda, and I called out to him and said, Kabir, you need to wear your shoes. And he ran up to me and said, you know what? I can't wear my shoes because my friend who's playing with me doesn't have a pair of shoes. Children have the ability to be equitable. Children have the ability to engage differently. And it is our responsibility as leaders, as influencers, to step in and possibly add or bring in the wisdom of the children of our community so that we too can engage via sports and create greater wisdom that allows us for all of us to move together. My apologies, I'll have to run, but great talking to all of you, and I hope to stay connected. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Priti, and thank you again for that reminder, and to David and to the ambassador as well for the reminder of the intersectionality of this work, whether that's socioeconomic, whether it's race, or whether it's gender, how these things fit together. I'm conscious of time, and we will also hear from Jamal Hill, who's on the call, about his story. So let me go now to Emmanuel, and I will, Emmanuel, ask in the same way as I said to David, whether you wish to speak to us about the innovation for the labor market within sport, or the effect that sport can have as an enabler of inclusive development. I would turn to you for your remarks now. And you're on mute, Emmanuel.
You can hear me. And I was saying that I am really delighted to be part of this this conversation in a very special day, a day full of meaning and symbolism that should be more than just a date. And I want to say, being 53, having a full life experience, being fulfilled in many fields, as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a lawyer, as an executive in the sports industry, I feel a mix of feelings. I feel happy with the strides that have been made. I feel encouraged by the perception that it's time for action. And I feel even more encouraged by the perception that it's now or never. But I feel also frustrated, and I feel a bit of anger. And apologies if I speak out of my heart, but that is how I am. And I would feel very, very uncomfortable here reciting data and reading pre-elaborated speeches when the world is coming to an end. We have one shot. The UN Secretary General has been very vocal and very strong about this. It is not the silver bullet, it is the last bullet that we have. And I find it appalling that everyone, we as citizens, we as sports executives, we as fathers, we as global leaders, we know this, and we are gladly walking towards the abyss as nothing would happen. It's like the Titanic orchestra continue to play when the ship is sinking. And we need to be truthful to ourselves, truthful to our dear ones, truthful to our next generations. We are an independent, neutral, multi-stakeholder coalition, and we were founded to fight for integrity in sport so that sport could exert its role to the fullest in today's global society and economy. And it is a broken, bruised, traumatic society that needs sport more than ever, because sport has the power to heal. I was listening to David and quoting Mandela as the patron of sporting Olympics, and he said it all in this famous speech. And by the way, I know who wrote that speech. But if we are not able to safeguard the integrity of sport, and I tell you, we are not doing all that we can, do the best that we can, sport will not be able to exert its role in today's society and in today's economy. But when I look beyond sport, what do I see? I see war. I see poverty. I see asymmetries. I see discrimination. And we are in 2022. We are not in 2020 when we had this epiphany and this expectation that the turning of a century and the turning of a millennium will bring finally the wisdom, the clarity, the enlightenment to do what is right. So, as a man who is white, European, and by the way, wears blue glasses, I feel ashamed for what my generation has been doing so far, because we have not doing everything that we can. We are here discussing what role and the full potential that people, human dignity, respect for human dignity, regardless of our social, our economic, our educational, the place of birth, the zip code, etc., can exert in our society. But we live in troubled times, in a troubled planet, and we are not doing everything we can. Why is that? Because we're waiting for global leaders to do their job? They will not do their job unless we are prepared to do ours. And this is a call for arms. This is a call for action. We need to be accountable. We need to look ourselves in the mirror and ask ourselves, are we doing everything we can? No, we are not doing everything we can, because this is a priority. I mean, this is the priority. The priority. And if we're not capable to fulfill these expectations in our lifetime, it's a shame that we have to leave it to the next generation, because the next generation may not have a chance. So for sport to do its role, to exert its social, educational, cultural, economic function to the fullest, sport needs to be played and governed under the lights with integrity. And it's not, because we continue to be influenced by politics and egos and conveniences. We continue to shatter any chance of consensus, because we are process-driven rather than being result-oriented. Because we continue to pay lip service and not focus on results. And what a shame this is. And I'm not being politically incorrect, because I've been politically incorrect all my life. But this is the moment of truth. And this is what brings us here all together in this day, to ensure that we can treat ourselves with dignity and respect, and we can also ensure that the primacy of human dignity in sport is not just an utopia or a rhetoric, but is a reality. As founding father and CEO of the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, I can assure you that I'm fully committed to use everything in my power to the last drop to make this happen. You that all our members, all our committed supporters, all our partners feel the same way. And I want to thank the United Nations, because the United Nations is the leading light. It's the lighthouse, and we need the United Nations more than ever. More than political leaders, we need leadership. And this is the moment. We all know what's happening around us. We all know what's going to happen if we do not take action. And this is the moment for action. So with all humility, knowing that individually we have no power, I call on this group, and I call also on the leadership of United Nations, and I want to take my hat off and pay tribute for the amazing efforts that Daniela Bass has been making. Also, the Secretary General of the United Nations, who I know personally, who I have accompanied for many, many years, who I have witnessed the anguish, the suffering, to provide a better life to those who are in pain, those who suffer, and those who are deprived of hope. But this is not just his responsibility. This is not just a task for the United Nations. This commands the action of each and every one of us. And I know many of you, if not most, if not all. And I know that there is leadership, there is commitment, there is soul, there is passion. And I do it bit by bit, inch by inch. But we can move forward, because the alternative
Emmanuel, thank you for your passion and your commitment to this work. It really shone through. Our last panelist before we speak to before we hear from Jamal is Glenn, and just to remind everyone that this panel is about sport, but it's really about SDGs 8, decent work and economic growth, and SDG 10, reduced inequalities. And I felt like Emmanuel's passionate words really spoke there to SDG 10, especially in the need to tackle those inequalities. We're again very proud to be part of a panel today, which is to promote dignity and integrity as part of the UN's role, and it's clear that arouses great emotions in people. Glenn, let me turn to you for your words on this, and then we'll hear from Jamal.
Thank you, Adam. My name is Glenn Killane. I'm the Executive Director of Eurovision Sport at the European Broadcasting Union. Thank you, Daniela, for the very kind invitation to be here. It's a real privilege to be representing public media here. Just to describe myself, I'm a 50-year-old Irishman based in Geneva. Not much hair on top, bit of a sunroof, wearing a pink shirt and a navy jumper. Just to really kind of summarize what I'm going to say is one phrase. If you can't see it, if you can't hear it on TV or on radio, it's very difficult for athletes of the future to have aspirations and to have heroes to look up to. And I think that's what the European Broadcasting Union is about. Just a little bit of information on who we are. We're the largest union of public media organizations in the world. We represent all of the public media organizations across Europe. That's 112 organizations. You may be familiar with some of the names of the organizations, like the BBC, ZDF in Germany, or ARD, France Télévisions in France, RAI in Italy. These are very large media organizations and very small media organizations across the entire continent of Europe. That's nearly 500 TV channels, that's 700 radio services, and 1,300 digital media platforms in 150 languages, with a weekly connection with over 1 billion people on the continent of Europe. Our reach stretches from Azerbaijan in the east to Iceland in the west, from Finland in the north down to Morocco in the south. So we have a very, very wide, broad sweep of audiences that we cater for. My part of the forest deals with the acquisition of sports rights on behalf of our members on a collective basis. That means distribution of sports events across those large that large population base. Everything from the current FIFA World Cup that we're all watching in Qatar, which we distribute across 35 countries, to the Women's European Championships this summer in England, to the Tour de France, World Athletics, European Athletics, and very critically and very importantly for me, the Special Olympics. We are media partners with the Special Olympics, and particularly for next year's World Games in Germany and Berlin. We're really looking forward to it. I began at the very inception of my career. I was executive producer of the Special Olympics World Games when it was in Dublin, Ireland, when I was working for RTE. And it was a very important moment in my career, a very important moment in the history of our country, I think. Nelson Mandela himself was there to open those games, and it was a really symbolic moment, and it was a real coming together of our country to welcome so many athletes from around the world. And it was a really instructive moment for anybody involved with it. I think what I'm trying to say, and what I would like to kind of put across today, is that it is so important that the work that goes on in sport and in disabled sport is seen and is available to be consumed, be it on audio, podcasts, radio, digital services, or on television, and is available for people to see, for those without disabilities to kind of recognize the fantastic endeavors that these athletes have to, all the work they put into their sport, and to see the pure joy that sport brings. So, I mean, from a television, from a radio point of view, that's our role. Our role is to bring a message to the world, is to support the work that goes on in organizations like the Special Olympics, and ensure that they have a place in TV schedules, online and on radio. And I suppose that would not happen without public media. Public service media is here to be a public good, is here to disseminate news, entertainment programs, but sport is a really, really vital part of that because of the role it plays in social cohesion, in bringing society together, in bringing the marginalized to the fore, and ensuring that they have a voice. And really, my only message today is we are here to help, we are here to support, but we need also your support. We need your support for public media to say, this is a public good. This is something that is worth supporting and maintaining. We are very, very lucky in Europe to have such strong public media organizations. What I'm very keen to emphasize is that there are organizations out there in our union who are very supportive of this, who are very supportive of disabled sport. They absolutely need to do more, and we will do more. And through our connection with organizations like the Special Olympics, we are fully committed to ensuring that there is no barriers to entry to consuming the content, and ensuring that everybody has an opportunity to partake. And hopefully the athletes of the future will see this and learn from it, and be, aspire to be like those on their screens or on their radios. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. And you hit on the question that we won't have time to discuss today, unfortunately, which is how we engage this network and sustain partnership amongst the public sector, including the UN, the private sector, and persons with disabilities. Part of that way is by showcasing these stories and in the work that you do. We are sadly over time, so we won't be able to dive into deeper discussion on that. I will say thank you to the amazing panelists who've spoken, and I will turn to conclude this section of the session to Jamal Hill, who will tell us his story.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Really grateful to be here today. Special thank you and acknowledgement to Alexia and to Daniela, as well as all the panelists who spoke today, as we are ultimately uncovering, discovering some of these transformative solutions for inclusive development. My name is Jamal Hill. I'm an American Paralympic medalist swimmer. I competed in Tokyo 2020, where I was privileged enough to walk away with an individual bronze medal in the 50-meter freestyle. My aquatics experience spans greater than 2 decades, and it's garnered me more than a dozen fastest times in U.S. history. I consider myself a champion not because of my accomplishments and accolades in the pool. I consider myself a champion because I pride myself on being a voice for the voiceless. I enact that through my dedication to ending global drowning and standing for those with disabilities. I currently live with a disease called Charcot-Marie-Tooth. It's a type of neuropathy. It's a hereditary neuropathy that I'm not a geneticist. I'm not sure if there are any geneticists here today. Maybe you can explain it to me, but ultimately this neuropathy turned on in my body when I was 10 years old. So up until 10 years old, I was air quote, normal, a normal kid. And at 10 years old, this neuropathy pretty much plagued my body, and it put me into a fully paralytic state. I was in that state for roughly about 4 days in the most inflamed condition of this neuropathy. And after that, I went from ultimately being, 10 years old, still very much learning my body, still learning all these things that come with being a child, to now I have a brand new body. And in my humble opinion, it decidedly worked a lot less well. I was left with 0% nerve capacity from my kneecaps to the soles of my feet, and 30% nerve capacity from my elbows to my fingertips. So I am a part of the spectrum of what some people like to call invisible disability. I don't necessarily fit many of the stigmas surrounding disability, whether that being some form of limb amputation, or seeing impaired, or hearing impaired, just all of the cues that society at large uses to ultimately classify people based upon what we see, right? So at the age of 10, myself and my parents, we came up against a pretty big wall, a pretty big barrier. Now my parents were not, I don't think, too involved with the United Nations. This is I don't know, 17 years ago. However, I think you all know just how much the perceived culture of our world has shifted from the early 2000s, from being a time where I was diagnosed with this disease and ultimately didn't want anything to be wrong with me. My parents didn't want anything to be wrong with me, especially growing up as an African-American male in the United States. They had the opinion that there's already enough challenges that you're going to face out here. The last thing you need is one more certified individual telling you what you can and cannot do. And so for that reason, even though I had that experience at 10 years old, my parents decided to keep the diagnosis of my condition away from me. So for a large part of my youth, I didn't have a name to call this. I just knew the experience. And their thought process behind that was ultimately very interesting, because again, I think everyone here understands the power of the mind, the body, and the spirit, and how all those come together into one human being, whether you're able-bodied, disabled-bodied, whatever language you like to use, right? These are just components of humanity. And we all know truly how influential one can be over the other. And my parents, in their wisdom in my life, in my experience, decided that it was best not to put me on a path to where I was going to determine the quality of my life, what I would be able to accomplish, such and such and such and such, because of some book written on the subject about this. Can you imagine that? The value of my life, the value of your life being contained in 100 some odd pages based off of case studies. Well, my parents couldn't. And quite frankly, to this day, I can't either. And so that was my experience. From 10 years old all the way until 22 years old, I hid my disability as best as I possibly could. There was a lot of cognitive dissonance. There was a lot of shame. Girlfriends, best friends, family members, nobody knew about this. This was the deep, dark family secret. And it drifted so far into the background that when I finally kind of reached the point of where I wanted to take my swimming professional, mind you, I competed high school, I competed Division III collegiate, all under the guise of being a fully able-bodied athlete. When I made the decision, hey, I want to go and become an Olympic swimmer, I think I want to make this my life and career. Well, number one, right? Only thing you ever got to say is I'm going to do it. And then the second thing is you just don't do it. So that's what I decided to do. And I went out and I was working to do it. I had an opportunity to work with some of the best coaches and swimmers in the world. And ultimately, I came across a coach. And for the first time in 12 years, since I was first diagnosed with disease, this coach pulled me aside and said, hey, there's something going on with you. I see the way that you climb out of the car, right? You pick your legs up with your arms as you get out of the car. I see the way that you go and you jump off the diving blocks. Obviously, you're a skilled swimmer, but I would not call that a dive. It's more like a well-articulated flop. You remind me of some of my patients with cerebral palsy from the past. And in an instant, in a flash, I had never felt more recognized. I had never felt more seen. But in that same moment, I had never felt more challenged, and I wasn't necessarily ready to go ahead and just face really who I was. It wasn't until another year passed by and a few more encounters like that had come about that ultimately I decided, wow, you know what? Maybe there's nothing wrong with being different. Maybe there's nothing wrong with me. Maybe I should go ahead and investigate this Paralympic route as opposed to the Olympic route. And so now I sit here with you today sharing a very brief snippet of my short story, and just, really grateful that a lot of you all who are representing such large organizations doing this disability work, whether it be from athletes to individuals in offices globally, that these people can see, if somebody like Jamal can do it, if somebody like you can do it, we all have so many stories that really is worth its weight in gold. So again, thank you so much to everyone for your time today. And please connect with me on the internet at Swim Uphill.
Thank you, Jamal, for that inspirational story. And I wish we had much more time. Thank you to all our other panelists for being part of this today. I will conclude with thanks to Alexia, Amin, and to Daniela, and all the DESA team. Let me recognize as well Ambassador Pico from Monaco, who's a huge champion of this work and couldn't be with us today. And to Ambassador Concepcion for starting us off on this panel. And with that, Daniela, I'll turn back to you with our thanks.
Well, I thank you all. And there are so many people as attending this event, even though it has been a marathon of almost 3 hours. I'm very proud of this event, of the interventions, of passion that we have heard, and also about what Jamal just said, the need not to be ashamed. And also Andy said, I think throughout this panel, not to be ashamed of having a disability. Actually bring it out. It adds value to our life and the lives of people, both in the working environment and persons with disabilities, with others, of course, but we are focusing today on persons with disabilities. This is International Day, are really very often problem solvers. They have to find ways to be extremely creative, to get an education, to be employed. And therefore, while doing this, if we think of sport, which was the last panel, sport, we have seen how an incredible tool and means is to promote inclusion and reduce inequalities. So all in all, SDG 8, employment, and SDG 10, reduce inequalities, put together. And if we work acting, as Emmanuel said, together, we might really achieve the implementation of the 2030 agenda, but above all, promote a world where there is justice, dignity, integrity, and equity. I would like now to open the discussion for a very few minutes, 5 actually, for a couple of questions. I will ask Amin here to help me to moderate, and there are only 1 minute per each either question or comment. After that, we will get very close to the closing of this event, where there will be the intervention of the Deputy Ambassador from the Permanent Mission of Korea to the United Nations. Let's remember that this event was just the starting of a conversation and creating a very strong network with which then we will carry on further workshops and actions to be taken. Thank you. So, Amin, any specific urgent questions that might be of interest to the general public? And we have maybe among us panelists who might reply with 30 seconds replies.
Yes, thank you, Daniela. I think we're okay in the Q&A. We didn't have any questions yet. While we're waiting, maybe you can go ahead and we can see if panelists they have more.
If we have no specific questions, because it's understandable to make a choice, I would like to ask maybe what kind of further actions, since in the last panel, Adam and others couldn't really go into depth, we could take together using the space given by the United Nations in order to better contribute, as I said, by creating employment and finding ways, innovative ways or old ways, but being implemented in innovative new ways, how we can contribute to the further discussions that will take place among member states next February during the Commission for Social Development, and then carry on activities that will feed into the Sustainable Development Summit that will take place here at the United Nations in New York next September, from the 9th to the 10th of September. So what can we do to make sure that these two very important SDGs are building a strong engagement network among us and others we might wish to include, for everyone to have a dignifying job, dignifying employment, and therefore reduce inequalities caused by poverty, at times injustice, or infrastructures, both physical or technological, that needed to be improved, and much more than that. So I would like to ask maybe one or two of our panelists if they would add something to this. What actions can be taken, concrete actions can be taken, visible actions from now until the next months, using the UN space and benefiting of the UN space. I don't see hands, Amin, from my screen. If you see someone who would like to intervene. I see Andy, please.
I see Andy. Yes, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela, and thanks again for your leadership in organizing this event. I'll just quickly say one thing we haven't talked a lot about is when our employment goals run up against other goals for people with disabilities. And I think from a policy standpoint, if we can be clear that it's good for disabled people to work, and that every person with a disability, no matter how severe their disability, can participate in the competitive labor market. If we can establish that as a global goal and make sure that our policies support that goal, to me, that would be an important concrete step.
Thank you very much. So this is a concrete suggestion that has to be translated then in concrete actions. So we might follow this up at the end of this event and see what we can do to make sure that policymakers and the private sector as well, with this collaboration and inclusion of persons with disabilities, can do. Yes, David.
Yeah, just to add quickly, one of the our research has found that the use of, and I'm very grateful to EBU and to Laureus and to SIGA for their very kind remarks. As we look at inclusive development for people of all abilities, I think one of the things that jumps out to me is the very cost effectiveness and cost efficiencies that surround the use of sport. Sport is something that can be done in a very expensive sports center. It could also be done on any field, anywhere around the world, with a couple of Coke bottles serving as goals and a great desire to achieve one's best. The great thing about inclusive sports is that its dividends far outweigh its investments. And so as we look to concrete actions, what could be more action-oriented than playing sport? And so as we look toward the future of policy development, of program development, of partnership design, the public and private coalition, sport has always not only excited the human race, but has also been one of the key tools in bringing us together. I say that because so often in these discussions, romance and morality come to the forefront, but it's the economics that make the decision. And I think that in the end of the day, the cost efficiencies of sport make it one of the most viable strategies moving forward. A big thanks to you, big thanks to you, Mrs. Bass, and to the entire DESA team. Thank you.
Thank you. And so with this boost of energy, I will now ask to give the closing remarks, and I really look forward to seeing you all around what I call the table of King Arthur. where we Knights will join our energies and efforts and skills to achieve the goals of having an inclusive, wonderful world. I mean, allow me to be a teeny bit romantic here. So please, the floor is yours, and thank you all for your participation. Deputy Ambassador of the Korea Republic at the United Nations. Thank you. Thank you also for your presence.
Hey, thank you, Director. I'd like to appreciate all panelists and participants for the contributions and inspirational stories, and thank DESA for organizing this event and all the hard work behind the scenes. I would not dare summarize today's enriching discussions into a few sentences. It would not do justice to many meaningful insights and impactful suggestions today. Let me, however, recapture the cross-cutting key themes of today: inclusion as a goal to achieve, and innovation and partnership as ways to get there. The genuine inclusion can occur only when the whole society questions itself who is left behind, why they are excluded, and what we can do to change that. Innovation can offer solutions and answers to these questions. As Secretary General stressed, and today's second panel has illustrated well, it can be powerful tools for inclusion and also reducing inequality. One of the core components of innovation, digital and assistive technology, has a great potential to opening new possibilities for persons with disabilities. It is encouraging to hear the double-digit growth in recent years of assistive technology for hearing, vision, and mobility devices. However, we should remind ourselves that the promises of innovation have to be realized and shared broadly. According to the first global report on assistive technology, while more than 2.5 billion people need assistive products, 1 billion of them are denied access. Especially for those in low and middle income countries, access can be as low as 3%. Broadening access to the innovation alone would not be sufficient. As today's first panel has emphasized, our efforts should be geared toward economic empowerment through support and education so that people with disabilities can contribute to communities with more in leadership positions, and communities benefit from that. This is where governments, together with the multi-stakeholders, should play a great role in making assistive technology affordable, facilitating public and private partnership, and providing required skills and education. Any framework for reducing the digital divide needs to integrate the strategy for inclusion for people with disabilities, with more emphasis on women and youth. In this context too, today's event focusing on the three interlinked themes provided a solid platform to discuss and incorporate these issues into our future policy and collaboration. The transformative and transcendent effects of this sports sector at the last panel, just like barrier-breaking artistic inspiration, should be shared, emulated, and improved upon in other sectors as well. Let me reiterate the imperative that we should go beyond the policy debating and making. It's time to find a solution and act upon what we have committed and what we have learned today. I would like to conclude by echoing what has been repeatedly stated today, that more needs to be done, and thus we should listen and act now. Once again, I thank all of you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, everyone. And let's join hands, work in a multilateral world together, because together, united, we can achieve so much. And that's why we hope to be able to create and strengthen this engagement and network we have present here today, and others that will join us in these efforts. Spread the voice. Thank you. Goodbye.